What if the thoughts you trust the most are actually the ones keeping you trapped? Not the thoughts you doubt, not the ones that feel forced or strange. The ones that feel like plain, obvious truth. The ones that feel like you, thinking clearly, for once. That's the strange cruelty of depression. It doesn't usually announce itself as sadness. It shows up as certainty. It tells you a story about yourself and your life, and it tells that story so calmly, so reasonably, that you never think to question the narrator. Over the next few minutes, we're going to walk through 7 of the most common mental traps depression uses to keep people stuck. Not by making them feel bad, exactly, but by making them believe things that quietly close off every exit. And for each one, we'll look at a specific, research-backed way to interrupt it. Not to just think positive. That's not what this is. This is about noticing the machinery. Let's start with the mechanism underneath all 7 traps, because once you see it, you'll start spotting it everywhere. Depression changes what your brain pays attention to, what it remembers, and what it predicts. Psychologists call this a negativity bias. A tilt in perception where ambiguous or neutral information gets filtered through a darker lens, and where negative information sticks, while positive information slides right off. A neutral text from a friend reads as distant. A small mistake at work reads as proof of failure. A good day reads as a fluke, quickly forgotten, while a bad day reads as the truth about who you really are. This isn't a character flaw. It's a well-documented pattern in cognitive psychology, closely tied to what researchers call cognitive distortions. Systematic errors in thinking that feel accurate from the inside precisely because they're consistent. They don't feel like distortions. They feel like insight. That's what makes them so effective at keeping people stuck. You're not fighting a mood. You're fighting a mood that has convinced you it's a conclusion. So let's name the traps, one at a time, starting with the one almost everyone recognizes once they hear it described. The first trap is all or nothing thinking. This is the mental habit of sorting everything into 2 bins: success or failure, good or worthless, fine or ruined, with nothing allowed in between. You had a productive morning and an unproductive afternoon, and instead of calling it a mixed day, the mind quietly deletes the morning and files the whole day under wasted. One awkward moment in a conversation erases every good moment that came before it. The danger here isn't the sadness of a bad day. It's that all or nothing thinking sets a standard so extreme that almost nothing can ever count as progress, which means the brain rarely gets evidence that things are improving, even when they genuinely are. The technique to interrupt this one is simple to describe, though it takes practice. Look for the third option. Not good or bad, but mixed, and that's normal. When you catch yourself using absolute words, always, never, ruined, worthless, pause and ask what a more accurate, more specific sentence would sound like. Not a falsely cheerful one. Just an honest one that includes the whole picture, not just the worst 5 minutes of it. The second trap is rumination, and this is one people often mistake for problem solving. Rumination is the act of replaying a problem, a mistake, or a painful feeling over and over, without any new information entering the loop. It feels productive. It feels like you're figuring something out. But research from psychologist Susan Nolan-Hoeksema, who spent decades studying this pattern, found that rumination doesn't lead to insight. It leads to deeper low mood, and over time, makes depressive episodes more likely to persist. The mind mistakes repetition for resolution. Here's the trap within the trap. Rumination often disguises itself as responsibility. I should think about this more feels virtuous. But there's a meaningful difference between reflecting to find a next step and circling the same thought with no destination. One useful way to interrupt rumination is what's sometimes called the 15-minute container. Instead of trying to suppress the thought, which usually backfires, you give it a scheduled, limited window. 15 minutes, timer set, where you're allowed to think about the problem as hard as you want, ideally with a pen and paper. When the timer ends, you close the notebook and redirect your attention, on purpose, to something that requires your hands or your senses. A walk, a chore, a conversation. The goal isn't to banish the thought. It's to stop letting it run unsupervised all day in the background. The third trap is emotional reasoning, the belief that because you feel something is true, it must be true. I feel like a burden, so I must be one. I feel like nothing will change, so nothing will. Feelings are real. They are not, however, reliable narrators of fact. A feeling tells you about your internal state in this moment. It doesn't tell you about reality. The technique here is a small but powerful reframe. Treat the feeling as data, not as verdict. Instead of asking, "Is this true?" ask, "What would I say to a friend who told me this exact thought?" That shift in perspective activates a more measured, less self-critical part of the mind, the same part that has no trouble seeing kindness and nuance when the subject is someone else. The fourth trap is learned helplessness, a concept first studied by psychologist Martin Seligman. In early experiments, when an outcome felt uncontrollable, no matter what action was taken, subjects eventually stopped trying, even in situations where action would have worked. The belief that nothing I do matters became more powerful than the actual facts of the situation. In depression, this often shows up as a kind of quiet resignation. Why apply for the job? Why reach out? Why try the thing, if it probably won't work anyway? The antidote isn't a pep talk. It's what psychologists call behavioral activation, taking a small, low-stakes action specifically because it's small, and noticing what actually happens, rather than what you predicted would happen. The mind that believes nothing works needs evidence, not encouragement. Even a tiny action, making the bed, replying to one message, stepping outside for 5 minutes, gives the brain a data point that contradicts the helplessness story. Small proof is still proof. The fifth trap is withdrawal disguised as rest. This one is subtle because rest is genuinely necessary, and depression is exhausting. But there's a difference between rest that restores you and withdrawal that isolates you. And depression is very good at making the second one look like the first. Canceling plans, just this once, can be legitimate self-care. But when it becomes a pattern, it quietly shrinks your world. Fewer people to talk to. Fewer moments where someone reminds you who you are outside the low mood. Fewer chances for the negativity bias to be challenged by real lived experience. Isolation and depression tend to reinforce each other, each one making the other easier to justify. The way to interrupt this isn't to force yourself into a party. It's to lower the bar for connection dramatically. Not see friends, just send one text. Not go out, just sit in a public space with a coffee for 20 minutes. Behavioral scientists sometimes call this reducing the activation energy, making the first step so small that avoiding it takes more effort than doing it. You're not trying to feel motivated first. Motivation, in depression, tends to show up after the action, not before it. The sixth trap is mental filtering, a pattern where the mind picks out the single negative detail in a situation and lets it color everything else, while the positive details simply don't register. You give a presentation that goes well, except for one fumbled sentence, and that one sentence is the only part you remember by evening. 10 kind comments and 1 critical one, and the critical one is the one that keeps you up at night. This connects directly back to that negativity bias we started with. But here's the specific technique for it. At the end of each day, write down 3 neutral or positive things that actually happened in plain, unemotional language. Not everything was fine, which is too vague to stick, but specific details. I finished the report. My coworker laughed at something I said. The walk home was pleasant. This isn't about forcing gratitude. It's about giving your memory something accurate to hold on to, so the filter has less room to operate unchecked. Over weeks, this measurably shifts what the mind treats as evidence about your life. The seventh and final trap is comparison, measuring your current, low-mood self against either other people's highlight reels or your own past best version. Social comparison is a well-studied driver of low mood, and depression sharpens it into something almost merciless. You don't just compare your Tuesday to a friend's Tuesday. You compare your worst days to their curated best ones, and the math never comes out in your favor, because it was never a fair equation to begin with. The technique here is to change the comparison entirely, not to someone else, and not to an idealized past self, but to yourself 7 days ago. Not, am I as good as them? Just, am I, in some small, measurable way, doing slightly better than I was a week ago? This is a comparison depression can't easily distort, because it's specific, personal, and close enough in time to be honestly assessed. Slower showers, one more conversation, one earlier bedtime. Small shifts count, and noticing them starts to rebuild trust in your own trajectory. So here's the thread running through all 7 of these traps. Depression doesn't lie by inventing wild, obviously false stories. It lies by taking something ordinary, a bad day, a hard feeling, a cancelled plan, a critical comment, and quietly stretching it until it covers everything. All or nothing thinking, rumination, emotional reasoning, learned helplessness, withdrawal, mental filtering, comparison. 7 different doors, but they all lead back to the same room. The belief that this is simply how things are, and how you are permanently. It isn't. These are patterns, not facts. And patterns, unlike facts, can be interrupted. Not all at once and not by force, but by small, repeatable actions. Naming the distortion when you notice it. Giving rumination a container instead of free rein. Treating feelings as information rather than verdicts. Taking small actions before motivation arrives. Lowering the bar for connection. Keeping honest evidence of your good moments. And comparing yourself only to where you stood a week ago. None of this replaces professional support. And if these patterns feel heavy or constant, talking with a therapist or doctor is one of the most effective steps you can take. This kind of thinking pattern is exactly what good clinical support is built to address. What we've covered here isn't a replacement for that. It's a way to recognize the machinery in the meantime, so it has a little less power over you today than it did yesterday. If this helped you see your own thinking a little more clearly, consider subscribing. We break down one of these psychological patterns every week, in plain language, with tools you can actually use. I'll see you in the next one. A quick note. This video discusses cognitive patterns linked to depression in an educational context. If any of this feels personally heavy, it can help to talk with a mental health professional. And I'm glad to help you find resources if that would be useful.